on, guys? This is Christian for Forward Momentum. Today's episode is brought to you redneck style from my backyard. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some of the key problem areas of the LEXUS GS and Aristo so you can do a used car inspection properly. Now, this is in addition to what you would normally do on a used car inspection. So be sure to take it to a mechanic, get it put up on a lift, and look for all those normal problem areas. This, however, will take you through those little details that most shops may not look for. It will give you more leverage in negotiating a price with the seller as well. Now, if you already own a GS or an Aristo, then go look for these items. So don't turn this episode off just yet. Be sure to watch it all the way through. Go check for these items and see if maybe you have some of those problem areas. All right, let's start with the outside of the vehicle and let's get to it. These are pretty solid, guys. There's not a whole lot on the exterior that goes wrong with these, but there's a couple points of interest that you might want to know. First of all the windows are stamped with a Toyota stamp, and the stamp is located here. It's going to be really hard to see that stamp just because I have a reflection. So there's a stamp here, and there's one here. And sometimes tint makes it hard to see. There should be one also on the back window in the lower left corner. There we go. So there's your stamp that you're looking for right there. That's going to be in every window except for the windshield, which most likely on vehicles this old would have been replaced. So all the glass will have that stamp. And the reason you're going to look for that is in case there was an accident and they didn't replace the glass with original Toyota glass, or it just tells you that there was an accident on a certain side of the vehicle. Also, the sunroof has it. It's right there. This item is pretty common on most vehicles, but when you shut the garage on your vehicle, this vehicle gets it really bad. Right in this area here, you can see there's a scratch there and here and right in here. It's not really a GS issue. That's kind of an ownership issue, right? Another area of concern possibly is here on the driver's side sill. And the reason that that might be of concern is because if you ever have locked your keys in the car, or the previous owner or whoever owns the vehicle did, they'll use a bladder type method to pry the door open in order to get in. Look here and make sure that this isn't bent, because they'll stick a bladder underneath here and pump it up and it'll bend this whole piece outward. So just something to keep an eye on there. Next is something you should do on every vehicle, but I'll just show you where this is located. Your VIN number, of course, is here. And then every one of your doors, if it's original, should have the original VIN number in these locations. So you got one here, you got this one, which is kind of up under. On the passenger side, it's on in the same location. Again, this isn't necessarily a deal breaker. It gives you an indication if this vehicle had been in an accident before and maybe the owner's not disclosing it. Here's your VIN for your hood. That's definitely something you want to look for. That's about it for concerns on the body. If you see something I missed from the exterior of the vehicle, be sure to drop it in the comments below. Let's continue on and let's start making our way towards the inside of the vehicle. I always like to check the spare tire area. Looking at the tire itself, making sure there's air in it. The tools, the jack, this thing. Next we'll head to the inside of the vehicle. First thing I would check is sunroof operation. These are notorious for going to full open, and then when you go to full close, they bounce back. And then you go to close it. See if it'll do it. Probably won't. There you go. When that happens, you may have seen this in a previous episode, you're gonna push on the glass in the back as it slides shut. So you activate the close again and give it a push. Not a deal breaker, but an expensive fix by a LEXUS technician. Next thing I would check are the door lock actuators. If they haven't gone out on a vehicle this old, then that's an anomaly, because these things go out all the time. The door lock actuators on these are not that reliable, but they're easy to fix and they're cheap to fix. In fact, I'll have a future episode on. Don't let that be a deal breaker for you either, because it's not hard to do. This could be a negotiation thing, right? you can tell them, hey, you've got 2 door lock actuators out. Let me show you. This one's fine, but you're going to see them, they'll get sticky. When you activate the door lock, you'll see it not fully go back. So you should always be able to see this red here. Definitely check every single door for that and make sure that they're going fully back. So the alarm might arm the vehicle, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it says it's arming, makes the sound, but then you go and check the door and the door's still open. I would cycle the locks a lot with the key fob and with the actual switch right here on the door, and definitely look for full red. The next potential issue is with the telescoping steering wheel. You need to check it by taking this key out. Listen for noises, see if it goes fully to the stops or not, and then put the key in, and check it, make sure it's going to the right place. The actuators here on the side, so you can mess with it, make sure it works. They're metal gear. Really, they last a long time, but I have heard of them going out. Next, I would look at the shifter. These plastic covers inside here are notorious for breaking up and falling down in there. It's not a huge deal because you can just clean it out, and I just run my car without it. That's a possible future episode there. Something you might be able to negotiate with the seller on. Okay, you're going to want to check the climate control system. These the air mix servos are notorious for going out. So definitely run it through its modes and listen. Okay, mine's fine, thankfully. Next up, guys, would be the radio. Make sure it turns on properly and illuminates. The Neo's in the way here, I know, but you want to make sure that the tweeters are working, because for some reason the Nakamichi stereos, the tweeters will go out, and they'll go out intermittently. So check that, make sure it works. If not, you can negotiate with the seller. Okay, next up would be the cabin air filter. There's a panel right here. You just pull it off. Okay. This one is only has about 1,000 miles on it. There's already some stuff building up on there. But if someone has not changed this, it is going to be absolutely covered with crap. I always like to check the cabin air filter. If they don't have maintenance records and the cabin air filter is absolutely destroyed, chances are they didn't take care of the rest of the car, because this is so easy. This is like a $10 item. But you'll have to make the decision whether that's something that is a deal breaker for you or not. It kind of depends on the rest of the vehicle. Inspect your vehicle at night and make sure you make note of the bulbs that are burned out. These are all good here, except for up here. So you can see those are out. And then down here, this one, and this one are out. Just wanted you to see that. That's about it on the interior of the vehicle. These things are solid, and when they say they don't make them like they used to, for the most part that's true. They use high quality components and engineering, and the end result is we still have vehicles on the road today that are still in great shape. They're just a few items that you should look for. Probably the biggest one for me is that cabin air filter. I don't know why, but that just really bothers me when there's a cheap $10 item that somebody didn't take care of in 200,000 miles or something. If you do find that, look at the big picture, but that's a big red flag for me. The stereo might be an issue for you, but you can pick up a used one for pretty cheap, and you can also now replace these Nakamichi stereos with double DIN units for pretty cheap. Okay, let's move on to the engine. What we have here is the 1UZ engine, the V8, one of the most reliable engines ever made, known to go over 1 million miles. These things are bulletproof. There's not much to tell you about what to look for on these other than your standard inspection items. There really isn't one particular part that goes out on these prematurely. You know, they'll go through alternators. Occasionally the starter will go out, and that's a little bit of a bear to get to because you have to remove the intake manifold. You know, mine has 163,000 miles on it, and it has been extremely reliable. They do have timing belts, so that is something you'd want to check for when you were looking for a used GS, if you were going to get the V8. Definitely make sure that that's been done, because the chances are they're over their limit already in mileage. And I did mine at 120,000 miles. The timing belt looked fantastic. There were no visible signs of failure that were going to happen soon. And typically you might see a sticker like this one. I put this on because I did the timing belt myself. A lot of times the dealer will put a sticker on, or there'll be a record in Carfax of the timing belt being done. One thing, if I was buying a used one, I would look and say, oh, they have intake on it, you know, who's the owner? If it's some 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid and racing stickers on the side windows, I'd be a little worried. That's to your personal preference, of course. You know, I've had a few issues with this, but it's always been related to the fluid and the car sitting for a while. So if the car's been sitting and you start it up, this booster primes itself and you'll hear the motor running when it first goes. That might be something to look for. You might be looking at a 300, which would be the 2JZ GE, and that would be the inline 6, which is also an extremely reliable engine. Really, there's not much on those either that goes out, aside from common issues with any engine, right? Wear items. You're not going to go wrong with the engines if you're looking at a 300 or a 400 or a 430 with the 3UZ. There is one thing that I will mention. It's kind of the engine, but kind of not. That would be the engine mounts, which some might argue would be the chassis. You can count on those starting to go. And when they go, what you can do is put it in drive and put your foot on the brake really hard and give it a little bit of throttle or gas, and the engine will flex quite a bit. I don't know if I'm doing it the correct way, I can't remember, but the engine will flex a lot. And I'll show a picture of what bad engine mounts look like. And the way to tell, though, is to do that test. So if you're going to be doing an inspection, you might want to have another person there. The engine mounts are about 180 bucks for some decent ones. And then if you have somebody do it, it's going to be roughly 2 hours to 3 hours of shop labor. You're looking at 500 bucks probably to do the engine mounts. If you do them yourself, you're going to be at about 200 bucks. My last episode, we talked a little bit about in here, these fins on the radiator get really blocked up. So the other thing I would do for sure is to hook up an OBD scanner to it and make sure there's no codes or stored codes. When it comes to the underside of the vehicle, there are two major areas to look. One is the catalytic converters, here and here. Depending on where this car came from, you're going to see a lot of rust buildup on the exhaust components, especially on the flange at the catalytic converter bank 2 and bank 1, right there where I'm showing on my light. Those can be roughly 500 to 1500 if they go out. It just depends on what you want to spend. I'm on the driver's side wheel well in the rear, and I'm looking at the front side of the muffler. Now these are aftermarket mufflers. If you've seen my previous episodes, you know that these are newer. The stock mufflers get a lot of rust buildup right in this area. Often will have holes in the muffler right there. You can see it through the wheel well, which is nice. Now let's move on to the suspension, which is probably the most problematic area of getting a used GS or an Aristo. Pop a couple wheels off and I'll show you the key areas to look for. We're entering now the area where I have the biggest concern and I see the most issues on these Lexus GSs. That would be the suspension. So if you've hung with me this far, thank you. And now is the time to pay attention, because this is really the area you want to look for on these GSs. It can be very expensive to take care of this. So we'll start with the front suspension and then we'll work our way to the back suspension, and we'll look at some of the common areas you might see if you're in the market for a GS. On your test drive, you need to go at a fairly high speed, like 60 miles an hour, and you need to step on the brakes sort of hard. Going down a hill works the best, and feel for vibration in the steering wheel. That would mean your front rotors are warped. These are heavy cars and they can have warped rotors. It's hard to say. And if someone used cheap rotors or they use the originals past their service limit, then you might be replacing those rotors real soon. If you feel that vibration in the steering wheel when you hit the brakes at a higher speed, you know it's warped rotors. What I'm going to cover here are the upper control arms and the bushings and the upper ball joint into the lower ball joint down here. So basically every pivot item on these cars is susceptible to wear. It's not because it's a bad design, it's because the cars are heavy and because you're generally going to be looking at a higher mileage vehicle. Now at 163,000, mine has been great so far. You're going to be listening on your test drive for clunking, for abnormal movement of the vehicle, where it wanders on the road. The lower ball joints on these must be changed. The lower ball joint is right here. The lower ball joint is not hard to replace and it's cheap. It's like 35 bucks for a Moog one. If there is no record of that lower ball joint being done, you've got to do it, okay? Both of them. The failure is catastrophic if those go out. Basically, it's as if your suspension falls apart and ruins, you know, the front end of the vehicle where that comes apart because it just becomes detached from the spindle. Okay, very similar to the front of the car that I just talked about on the rear of the vehicle. But everything's pretty much the same. Check the brakes. The brakes tend to hold up pretty well in the rear of these. You're not going to get warped rotors in the back of the car very often. If you can, on your road test, have someone sit in the back seat. Sometimes that can give you an indication of what's going on in the rear. These are generally not very problematic back there. Worn parts, bushings, that sort of thing. Basically just kind of go through all of the components and look for the bushings to be in good condition and not have visible signs of cracking or damage. Take a look from this way. So this is 163,000 miles. I've replaced these struts with KYB XLGs, as you may have seen in a previous episode. I want to show you what the beginning signs of worn out bushings look like on my upper control arm here in the rear. But you can see that it's starting to pit. It just indicates that, you know, these are starting to get worn out. Replacement parts can get pretty spendy on the suspension. If you start adding up costs, you can start getting into the $1,000 to $2,000 range for, like, for example, the whole front end or the whole rear end. There you have it. If you're going to get a LEXUS GS or an Aristo, those are some of the key items to look for on the vehicle. Now that's in addition to the standard inspection items, so be sure to have that used car inspection done. The suspension is probably the biggest concern on this vehicle. Really check that suspension out. Test drive that thing. Make sure that you don't hear any weird sounds. The lower ball joints, if they have not been done, you've got to do them. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like. Also, if I missed something, drop a comment. Make sure that you check out the YouTube's new comment policy. You kind of have to click a box to see all the comments. I'll try to update the video description with any comments of items that I missed. I appreciate all my viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in and for sticking with me through this video. This video was intended for both people that are interested in the GS and the Aristo and for those who own one already and want to go and do an inspection on their own vehicle. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.